Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar, History and the Role of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program, Applying History to Today's Work. All the lines are muted, but you can answer or ask questions or enter questions into the question box found on the toolbox on the right-hand part of your screen. We'll take questions as they come if we can, or for sure at the end of this time. Excuse me. So we're fortunate to have the following speakers as part of today's webinar. Kathy Hart, Idaho State Ombudsman, and Patty Ducaille, who's we're working on getting her connected, but she'll be with us later on in the webinar. And this is Carol Scott, Ombudsman Specialist with NORC. What we're going to cover today is the environment of the Ombudsman program in the 1990s that led to the Real People, Real Problems, and evaluation of the long-term care Ombudsman programs by the Institute of Medicine, and into the early 2000s with NASOP's beta report, Thinking and Retooling for the Future. We'll discuss how these pivotal reports led to the 2016 rule and further guidance of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program. We'll also discuss Module 1 of the training curriculum and the state mini-tool self-evaluation. We hope that you have the IOM and the beta report in your office or have them bookmarked on your computer. When I was serving as the Missouri State Ombudsman, I often referred to both of these documents. Okay, so for kind of the homework, in preparation for today's webinar, we hope that you took some time to look at Module 1 of the online curriculum. This online curriculum is available for anyone who is an ombudsman or wanting to become an ombudsman. These make great trainings to have people look at, especially as they're waiting to take your formal training. Section 1 of this module covers how the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program began. We believe it's important to have everyone understand the history and how the program has both stayed the same and changed over the years. For instance, in the beginning and continuing today, there's a lot of emphasis on having volunteers serve. There simply isn't enough funding for paid staff to get into every facility and make the contact and connections with all the people living there. The first video in the module, Advocate for Resident Rights, Advocate for Resident Rights, sorry, gosh. This video features Dr. Arthur Fleming, the father of the Ombudsman program. He's the man who envisioned an advocate model ombudsman, and during a helicopter ride with President Nixon, talked about his vision. When the ride ended, President Nixon added the Long-Term Care Ombudsman program to his speech regarding the proposed Older Americans Act. And these were the parts of the video the things that were covered in that video: the role, the purpose, 5 skills an ombudsman need, and characteristics. And at this point, Katie, would you open the first poll? So which of the following was not mentioned in the video? Advocate, educator, investigator, listener, mediator. Now, all of these are appropriate roles, but I'm just wondering if you could pick out the one that was not mentioned in the video. And Katie, when we get to, 75, 80% vote, could you close the poll?
Sure, we're about 52% right now.
Okay, everybody. Oops, I'm gonna mute myself for just a second. Okay, Katie, let's go ahead and close. And we'll see the results. Okay, I can't see the results. So what do the results say?
8% said advocate, 0% said educator, 25% said investigator, 42% said listener, and 25% said mediator.
So if we were on that game show where you asked the audience, probably the person would say, well, it must be listener because that's what most of the people said, and that would be the correct answer. It doesn't say listener, but that is not one of the ones that was mentioned. So if you haven't watched that video lately, this would be maybe something to put on your to-do list. It's not very long, and it really is a good reminder of where the program came from and some really just basic tips of being a good ombudsman. Section 2 of this module talks about the ombudsman program under the Older Americans Act, and one of the parts of it that I think is so true about being an ombudsman is that we don't do that just on behalf of residents as individual complaints. We also do it as part of resolving systems issues and laws, regulations, and policies. So it's kind of a twofold thing that ombudsmen do as advocate ombudsmen, resolve individual complaints, and that sometimes leads to resolving systems issues. Section 3, and as you maybe have read as you look through this module, contains a lot of items that can be used in training the representatives of the program. We all know that the Ombudsman program fulfills a unique role. It's not Adult Protective Services nor the licensing agency, and it's imperative that all ombudsmen understand and be able to articulate the role so that others, family members, residents, and staff have a realistic understanding of what the ombudsman can and cannot do. We are, or ombudsmen are, one of a kind. They are operated by an office of state ombudsman, headed by a state ombudsman, responsible for a statewide program, have strict disclosure provisions, specific conflict of interest provisions. They pursue administrative, legal, and other remedies on behalf of residents. They're protected from willful interference. They do individual and systems advocacy. They do resident-directed advocacy, and they have legal counsel available that is free of conflict of interest. So knowing what the Ombudsman program is and how it differs from other agencies is important, not only for state ombudsmen to know, but all their representatives. And then teaching all representatives about the code of ethics is critical to the success of the program. And I'm wondering if, and you can type this into the question or chat box, have you encountered any resistance when or heard of a case where on behalf of residents in your state? So have you encountered any resistance? And if you did, how did you remedy that situation? And do you have any tips or tools to share regarding helping others understand the uniqueness of the long-term care ombudsman program? So if you want to type in on those issues, you are welcome to do that. And the last one of the last sections is LTCOP, which is the National Association of Local Long-Term Care Ombudsman Programs, similar to NASOP, but made up of the local programs. I encourage you to visit with the 2 representatives of this organization who will be with us in Orlando, and that you encourage your local folks to become members of that association. And the last section in the module talks about the NORC resources that are available to assist you. So why do ombudsmen stay with the program? Well, there's a whole section on this, and I pulled out this one example from Kathy Schmidt in Maryland, where she says that handshake and a thank you from a family member after a 2-hour care plan meeting is about $500. A beautiful smile lighting up the face of the resident that you promised to come back and chat with was $50,000. Filling out the monthly reports and progress notes, $5. The look on the administrator's face when you tell her that you personally have observed the facility in making a mistake that she considered nothing more than complaining by a family member whose expectations were too high, priceless. So Carol, I think, hit that smack dab on. So Module 1 had a quiz. We'd sent it out. 6 people had filled that out by 11 o'clock this morning. Thank you so much. One of the questions that several people got stumped on was all ombudsmen work under the delegated authority of, and I'm going to ask Katie to open up poll number 2. If you haven't taken the quiz, feel free to do so. It's at the bottom of the Module 1 training. And if you have others in your program take the quiz, you can access their results by using the code that's been given to you. And if you need your code, contact Katie or myself and we can send that to you. There is a separate code for each of the different modules. So as people take those, take the training and complete the quizzes, you can check and see how well each of them did on those, and all of this is on the website under the modules. If you have any questions or comments about Module 1, I hope you'll type those also into the toolbox, and we will get to those as time permits. Katie, do you want to close and tell me the results?
Sure. 6% said residents, 11% said state agency on aging, 78% said state long-term care ombudsman, and 6% said federal law. Okay.
Well, again, we'll go with the majority. All ombudsmen work under the delegated authority of the state long-term care ombudsman. So it wasn't supposed to be a trick question, but it's that word delegated authority. And as you know, you must delegate the people underneath you, the staff and volunteers, to be certified in your state. Now I'd like to turn the program over to Kathy Hart. And Kathy has been the Idaho State Ombudsman for over 20 years, and she has been a mentor for 5 new state ombudsmen. So welcome, Kathy. And now you need to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you, Carol. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm so glad to be here. And as Carol said, I've been around a long time. Just real quickly, a little bit about myself, so that some of the comments I make throughout my presentation will make a little more sense to you. I have been the state ombudsman for 24 years in Idaho and 6 years before that. So Idaho is a minimum funded state. We're very small. My office is located within the State Unit on Aging, which is directly under the Office of the Governor. So in my tenure in the 24 years, I've had 7 directors and 2 or 3 interim directors, all appointed by the governor. So things can get a little political, and over the years there have been a few struggles with my ability to do systems advocacy, among other things, especially in the realm of adult protection versus ombudsman and those kinds of things. At one point, our State Unit on Aging took on the adult protection program, and I was charged with not only being the state long-term care ombudsman, but also the coordinator of the adult protection program. A little bit later, we were also charged with actually investigating adult protection complaints in the nursing homes. So as you can see, I know I'm not alone in some of those things, but I will talk a little bit more about that as we go along. And I've included an awfully lot of information in each one of the slides. I know that you're all really kind of overwhelmed with all the things you have to read and things you have to learn if you don't have prior experience in the Ombudsman program. And I was hoping that these slides could be referenced in lieu of reading the entirety of some of these reports at this time. They're very valuable, and it's great to go through them, but I know maybe it'll be hard to get to them right away. The Institute of Medicine study was conducted in 1995. That was my very first year. I'm sure I was walking around with the deer in the headlight look, but at the urging of the Ombudsman program, Congress requested this study, and we really just wanted to take a look at strengths and weaknesses and just kind of see where we were at. By this time, the program had been in operation for about 20 years, so there was some time to be able to evaluate that. There had been many, many changes. Over 1987 had brought sweeping changes to the nursing home industry. Managed care organizations were cropping up. Nursing homes began to shift from long-term care residents to subacute facilities, and the Ombudsman program had expanded to cover assisted living facilities. The goal of this study was to assess program performance and make recommendations on strategies so that the program could better achieve the objectives. And it was based on 4 issues: extent of compliance with the mandates, the federal mandates, availability and effectiveness of the program, the adequacy of resources, and the need for and feasibility of providing Ombudsman services to older individuals not residing in long-term care facilities. And I will tell you that when the Ombudsman program in Idaho started out, we always worked with people in the community. So anybody over 60, the Ombudsman program could work with. Didn't work out too well, but that is how we started. And I think it kind of speaks to these next bullet points as far as findings about not all residents being consistently visited. So they didn't really have meaningful, consistent access to the Ombudsman program. And believe it or not, there was Ombudsman work being done strictly by phone. So residents didn't have timely access to the program either. Implementation was not consistent across the states, and even more inconsistent in the board and care or assisted living homes. They didn't uniformly comply with the requirement to provide statewide Ombudsman services. There was no monitoring or standard level of effort, no technical guidance, or no availability of legal services. So definitely the program should operate throughout the country in compliance with federal mandates, and that was really a big undertaking. So the first recommendation was around that compliance issue. So they recommended that we broaden the program to serve younger residents, ensure that the Ombudsman services were also available to veterans, and a federal oversight system should be implemented, and policies and guidance should be developed to detail expectations of the program and mechanisms to enforce compliance with those federal mandates. They also recommended that an Office of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman be required at the federal level in the Administration on Aging, which is now the Administration for Community Living. They recommended that the program nationwide develop agreements and cooperative working collaboration with the organizations that are listed on the screen. I won't read all of those. They asked that we ensure adequate and independent legal counsel for the program, and Carol touched a little bit on that one. Conflict of interest had really risen to the level of quite a big concern. And so the study really felt that it warranted development of a broader array of tactics to prevent, to identify, and correct those pertinent conflicts. And like I said, my being so involved with the adult protection is just one example of how those conflict of interests really existed in some of those states. So they recommended that the Older Americans Act include new policy directives regarding the placement of the Ombudsman. And the most common example of that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, is the fact of ombudsman programs being located in a larger agency that also houses the Survey and Certification Agency for Long-Term Care Facilities. That is a definite conflict of interest. That one is a little bit more obvious than some of the others, but it's just a really good example. They recommended that policies be developed to prohibit parties that fall within the purview of the Ombudsman program from participating on boards that actually regulate the program or make recommendations for the program in any way. They recommended policies and procedures to identify the conflicts of interest and guidance on how to address those, not just identify them, to ensure that no conflict exists, and again, that legal counsel was provided for the program. So one of the other recommendations was around effectiveness of the program. And even though we had a lot of problems and we were uncovering a lot of weaknesses that needed to be built on, the Ombudsman program really was determined to be a very vital program, and it was recommended that Congress continue the program. And at this point in 1995, it was actually being looked at as a model for other healthcare ombudsman programs that people around the country were looking at establishing. So they recommended that we developed an objective method to assess compliance and refine the current information system to develop valid and reliable measures for assessing the impact of the program, and to develop a system to ensure adequate management of volunteers. And again, Carol mentioned the importance of the volunteer program, and I know that it varies from state to state today still, but the incorporation of volunteers into our program has been so important in us meeting the objectives and the needs of the residents that we serve. So as always, there has been a problem for the adequacy of the resources we're given to do the work that we want to do. And certainly there was a recommendation way back in 1995 that appropriations be increased and guided by an indicator of one ombudsman per every 2,000 long-term care beds. Now, mind you, in Idaho, that is still the indicator that we go by to determine the number of ombudsmen per long-term care beds. And I will tell you that back in 1995, when I started as an ombudsman, we were looking at complaints involving lost dentures, lost laundry, dirty rooms. Today, our complaints are much, much more complex and complicated than they were in those days. So I'm not sure that that base indicator still serves the same purpose as it did back in 1995. They recommended that we revise the interstate funding formula to consider the number, size, and type of long-term care facilities in each state, and to require that states match federal funding they receive under Title VII, Chapter 2 of the Older Americans Act at no less than 20%. They also recommended that the fiscal responsibility for the Ombudsman program be delegated to the state ombudsman program. And in my situation in the Unit on Aging, we have a fiscal person. And in the past, that fiscal responsibility was rolled into all of her other fiscal responsibilities, and she handled that rather than the state ombudsman. So they also recommended that an audit of expenditure practices in each state be done to determine if there was diversion of program funds. And then if Congress mandates additional responsibilities for the Ombudsman program, that along with that would be additional resources. So certainly, one of, I think, kind of an all-encompassing recommendation was that before any consideration could be given to the expansion of the program, it was imperative that all of the mandates under the Older Americans Act would be fully implemented, and that research should be done to determine how the Ombudsman services could best be delivered to the consumers of healthcare and long-term care services. So fast forward 8 years, and Carol Scott was the president of the National Ombudsman Association, so right at the forefront of this grant that we got to do the Bader study, which was Rethinking and Retooling for the Future. it was handled in a little bit different manner than the Institute of Medicine study in 1995, in that it was a retreat session where white papers were reviewed, there were consensus building sessions, debates, and discussions. And it was determined that the success of the Ombudsman program depended on its independence. So you'll see kind of a common thread from way back in 1995 to 2003 coming maybe to fruition in, for the most part, in our new federal regulations in 2016. So the goal was very simple. It was to improve the Ombudsman program and the care of the long-term care residents. So there was a review of current research and knowledge about the program. There was also a review of characteristics of the long-term care population to determine the changing needs in the healthcare climate in 2003. So it was also reviewed how best to inform participants on relevant topics and how to coordinate services for people with Alzheimer's disease. And fast forward today, we can look back and see how very important that is. And of course, that is always a work in progress, and I don't think it's anything that anyone will ever completely accomplish, but something that we certainly need to continue working on. There was also a goal to develop materials that could be used by the states that would give us the information we need to put in publications, to provide testimony or speeches, and that would really serve to bring our programs more into a consistent compliance with the Older Americans Act. So the first recommendation, again, was independence. Talking about conflict of interest and how important it was to very specifically not be located or too closely associated with the agency responsible for licensure and certification of the long-term care facilities. That there needed to be remedies developed for conflicts of interest, and that to ensure that the programs have autonomy. And I guess as I explained to you kind of what Idaho's setup is, I most certainly did not have autonomy to the extent that I think the Older Americans Act intended for us to have back in that day. So the recommendations and the new federal regulations, I just can't say enough how it's helped me to do a better job for the program in Idaho. It also recommended that programs be monitored in some way to make sure that they were in compliance with the Older Americans Act requirements, and that there was a recommendation that adequate resources be provided. Again, systems advocacy, and I will say back in the day, I think systems advocacy can be a little bit difficult, and then it can be a little more visible, a little more political, a little more I think, contentious with other entities, such as in my case with my state unit on aging. I don't think that ever really happened, but there is a possibility that the advocacy that an ombudsman program might provide systemically could be in contradiction with something that a state unit might be promoting. So the new federal regulations certainly protect us from that. So it was really wonderful that the study involved conducting interviews with all the state ombudsmen and local ombudsmen to just really get a sense of what the boots on the ground were seeing and doing, what the barriers were, the attitudes, and the approaches that they were using to systemic advocacy. They recommended that intervention strategies and remedies for programs that weren't doing a good job, that those would be developed. And, one of the really great things about the Ombudsman Network is everything is always shared. So, I mean, certainly, I don't mean the confidential things, but just the best practices, the good ideas. It's just really great to be able to pick up the phone and call somebody and say, hey, I need to do this. Do you have any ideas? And then the Resource Center is so great about having a lot of training, documentation, just a library of great things to help us with that as well. So they also, again, recommended that we develop better communications and collaborations with a set of national agencies. These agencies are a little different than the ones that were pointed out in the 1995 study, but just a better job of collaborating with other agencies that also are involved in aging and long-term care issues. So they recommended that training standards be developed that would include continuing education requirements, and that a mission statement would be developed that would reflect those standards, that an orientation and training of all new state ombudsmen would be developed, and that a national curriculum would be established and accessible to all states. So they also recommended development of ongoing systems advocacy training and intervention strategies for state ombudsmen. And of course, now we do that through webinars like this one and through our annual meetings that we have this year in Orlando. So we also, it was recommended that a team of experts be organized to develop or offer on-site visits to help educate the state counterparts, state unit directors, and others on what system advocacy is and what effective systems advocacy is for the Ombudsman program. So also, it was recommended that joint policies and other agencies develop systems together to support each other and the Older Americans Act mandate for systems advocacy. And again, there was a lot of stress on developing national training standards, developing hiring and management tools for use by state and local programs, and to expand the orientation for new ombudsmen. And of course, the data and information, I always call that the necessary evil. I'm not exactly a data person, but just a real emphasis on how important it is for the data to be entered correctly so that we can use it for analysis, develop a regular method of auditing that data, and to take a look at the system in 2003 to see how we can improve it, how we can use the data for comparisons, for research, for analysis, for education, and also to develop a funding strategy to obtain the necessary hardware and software for those programs in all the states to get as up to date as they possibly could, and then to provide a system of outcome measures. Program effectiveness is always something that is really important to address. And again, the 2003 retreat recommended appointment of a director of the Office of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman at the federal level with the Administration for Community Living now, and to still once again meet that ratio of one paid FTE or full-time equivalent to 2,000 beds and at least one full-time ombudsman staff person per local program. They recommended that a tool be developed to manage each individual program's effectiveness, and I think maybe we're going to be talking a little bit more about that. And then a recommendation to develop policies for providing ombudsman information to consumers and providers, to develop policies that outline prioritization of the responses to complaints, and to determine the actual cost of the Ombudsman program and advocate for adequate resources. There was a recommendation to develop a public awareness campaign and to work toward national standards for assisted living. And as you probably know, assisted living is not regulated federally, but only through each state. So it varies so very much from state to state. So the thought there was to try at least to work towards a collective agreed upon national standards for assisted living. And then the last one was to develop and promote training programs for ombudsmen that focus on mental health conditions and conditions that affect decision-making capacity. And that is the end of my presentation, and I would just like to say that certainly with the federal regulations coming into play and being approved in 2016 has made such a difference for me in this small state where I am really so far removed from where the action is, I guess you might say, as far as being close to DC. And I haven't always been able to really participate in some of the federal opportunities that are offered because of the distance and the cost for me to do that. But I think with the new federal regulations, it's made a world of difference for my program. I think that the Ombudsman program, of course, is always a work in progress, but we've got a really great start, and it's a wonderful program. Excuse me.
Kathy, thank you so much. Exactly what we wanted as you dive for something to drink. Our next speaker is Patty Ducaye, the Texas State Ombudsman. And Patty, I have just unmuted you. Patty became the State Ombudsman in 2007 and has served as NASOP President and has mentored 4 new State Ombudsmen. So welcome, Patty.
Hi, thank you guys.
You're welcome. Glad to have you.
I'm going to have a little bit of a delay in terms of when I talk, I can hear myself twice, so forgive me as I try to get used to that experience. Oh, I hate it when that happens. Okay. Well, so I wanted to start off by saying that when I looked at the comprehensive tool the first time, the self-evaluation tool, I was totally panicked and I avoided it. I was so glad when the mini tool was developed and really promoted to me as a state ombudsman, because a 4-page tool is just a lot more tolerable to me, and I was willing to jump in and dive in and finally do it. So I'd like to walk you through the tool a little bit and hope that we're going to open up the lines and actually talk together for a little bit and get you to speak up. So are we going to be able to have the lines unmuted throughout my section?
Yes, whenever you say, we will unmute everybody.
Okay. And Carol, can I ask if there is sort of a repeat or echo effect on y'all's end, or is the sound quality okay?
Oh, sound quality is great.
Okay. So Katie might be able to pull up the full mini tool so that we can poke over to the right page when we're talking about something. So she'll be doing that in just as I talk. And I hope that you'll be willing to speak up and share something you're kind of proud of, or maybe something you're a little embarrassed of, because we're all amongst friends. And I'm going to certainly share some things that I did not score well on, because I want you to know that even after 13 years, there are plenty of things that you will be working on as a state ombudsman, and it's normal to have things change in your program and need to take a look at a new area, tackle something new. To get us started, I'm going to actually refer to something on page 4 of your tool. It's the very last section. This is my disclosure of my bad grade, because on accountability section, which is the 13th section, I have a score of 0. I don't have an advocacy, an advisory group, and so I have no credit to give myself on accountability for those 3 areas, and so there's something big that I can work on. But my first takeaway that I want to share with you about this tool is sometimes your lowest score isn't your highest priority to work on. And it's never been something I've tackled yet. So it's a reminder when you pull out this tool and do it again. Every time I'm a mentor, I'm doing it again with my mentee, and you're reminded of things that you need to pick up and dust off and start working on. So there it is on section 13 there about accountability. That's my goose egg. I have scores that range across the board. I was actually happy to do this again and feel pretty good. I pulled out previous tools that I've evaluated myself on in the past and saw some improvements. And one of the things that I really noticed was an improvement for me were in the areas of conflicts of interest, page 3, conflicts of interest and confidentiality. And I scored all 5s for myself on that. And I realize this is subjective and it's me making those decisions. But I was glad to see some improvement for myself that was really solid there. And the real reason I did well is that I have good policies and procedures in place, and my local ombudsman have been trained on those policies and procedures, got lots of evidence that they're following those procedures, and I feel like we have a good communication between our office, state office, and the local programs on these issues. So my second takeaway about the tool is that improving your program, like I had in these two areas, may take a lot of work. It always takes a lot of work. It may take a lot of time, but it doesn't necessarily have to require any money. It can be developing good policies and procedures. And so that's something for you to remember, that you may not have, every one of these areas may not be something you feel like you can fix because of financial challenges or staffing challenges. But if you can commit the time to carve out for certain areas and really work on them, you could show yourself some improvement and be proud of that. So I'd like to ask if anyone is willing on the call to speak up about an area where you scored well.
Muted.
So I am unmuting everybody. This would be very interesting.
Exactly. So that doesn't says that right to be there. And we, you know, we hear about a lot of residents. They get told
Everybody should know that you've been unmuted.
And unfortunate problem is that more of them believe that. They talk about it.
I need you guys to, hang on here. I'm going to mute everybody again. I need you to raise your hand if you want to speak. I'm sorry, but there's just too much background. Too much background. And Patty, let me unmute. I will unmute you. Okay, Patty, you're muted.
So the beauty of you muting me earlier was I didn't have to hear myself echo anymore, but here I'm back. So the question is to people, raise your hand and speak up about something that you did pretty well on. You don't have to give the number off, but just tell us about something you were proud of. No brave souls?
No braves. Oh, here we go.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, this is Mary from Indiana. We have a lot of work to do, and we are in the middle of not having a state ombudsman, so I'm the interim. But I did think that confidentiality was kind of our strong suit, and part of that is because before the state ombudsman left, he implemented some very strong policies regarding confidentiality. And then I'm going to be training on those pretty soon.
Great. So I guess you're sort of in my boat in terms of using policy. Once you have that established, it's really your route to doing well in this area.
Definitely. It is the basis, the foundation that gives you the authority to say, you know, this is how it has to be done, and this is why.
Well, I'm sorry for that tough situation. I know that it is really rough to be without your leadership. And we feel for you, Mary. I'm glad you're on the call and looking at these areas so that you can evaluate the program and have a sense of what's really important to tackle when you have a state ombudsman in place.
Yeah, I really appreciate the tool, actually, and look forward to doing it again in the next maybe 6 months to a year to see where we are.
Yeah, that was a suggestion that Carol Scott had made to me. We've heard this from Nork before. You've probably heard it before. But to evaluate yourself periodically. 1 year might be a good amount of time. Maybe 2 years is a good time to look again and reevaluate yourself.
So,
Patty, do you have any other areas you wanted to speak up about, Mary?
No, for now, I think that's it.
Okay.
So I've unmuted Sally.
Hi, Sally.
Hi, Carol. Hi, Patty. Hi, everyone else. It's Sally from Michigan. And I looked back to the last time that I'd done the tool, which was a little over a year ago, and I noticed that I scored us higher this year in legal resources. And I think a lot of that is attributed to us collaborating with we have a VOCA Elders grant that operates here in Michigan that's a Victims of Crime Legal Assistance Program. And so there's 10 attorneys throughout the state. And we've worked really hard to educate them about the Ombudsman program and see the Ombudsman program as a potential resource to help individuals with things like involuntary discharge, level of care determination appeals, guardianship issues, just kind of a different variety of issues that usually we would look for other legal aid resources. So I think that's helped a lot. And through that process, Allison Herschel has been kind enough to train a lot of those individuals, and they're really getting good to handle those cases independently. So I think the referrals go through much faster than what they used to. And we're seeing better results for individuals when they are filing those appeals.
It's great that you could look back at this and see an improvement. Did you specifically target this issue, or was this just an opportunity for you to notice it at this point?
I think a little bit of both. I think it helped when I went back and redid the tool to really think about how much progress we've made in that area. It was kind of a natural fit because the program is managed out of the same program that we're managed out of. So it kind of was a natural fit to see some improvements in that area, but it really was helpful to go back and actually evaluate it and see how far we've come, that we are getting access now to those services more than what we used to.
Well, that's awesome. Congratulations. So I think Sally's really putting a nice point on the fact of looking at your progress or looking and evaluating yourself in the future can actually, as much as we might avoid it, might actually give you a sense of accomplishment and success that you didn't anticipate. Mm-hmm. And it's so important to find ways to give ourselves a pat on the back, to find ways to see that we've moved the dial, because sometimes change is so slow and every day is so crazy in our job that you need these moments to take a step away from the casework and other crazy political problems you're having, and just take a look at some of these basic functions and how you've improved or where you need improvement. So the other thing I wanted to mention is that it's important to take a look at single items. If you could scroll to page 2, Katie. Thank you very much. Looking at individual questions in here sometimes will show you something that's a problem. If I look at, well, I thought it was page 2. Yeah. No, I'm sorry, page 1. Program management. When I look at that area, in some ways I do well on items 1, 2, and 3. But in item 3, I actually see some real weaknesses for my state. Yes, we have a systematic process for recruiting volunteers. We have a process, but are we successful at recruiting volunteers? The answer really has been pretty much a no lately. And this is an area where we had in the past as a state had really big numbers of volunteers, and that has just slipped and slipped and slipped, and I keep wondering when I'm going to hit rock bottom. And I haven't yet. It keeps going lower for us. So this is an inspiration for me this time around, completing the tool, that I already knew this was a problem, but this is really renewing my interest in making this a high priority for our program over the next several years. And using this evaluation tool and sharing it with somebody in leadership at my agency can also be a way to say, here's where we're doing well, and here's where I see a real problem. and asking for support, maybe even financial support from your agency in some way. This can be a way to show something you've done to evaluate yourself and prove that you need some help within the agency to improve. Another piece that you can do is skip over to the more comprehensive self-evaluation tool and use the more in-depth questions to go into a little more depth and show your leadership that same information in a more detailed way. So would anybody be willing to talk about an area you were low in and just talk that out with some of your friends on the call?
I've just unmuted Heather.
Hi, Heather. Maybe Heather doesn't want to raise her hand.
No, she raised it. Heather, you're muted, or maybe you're unmuted, or you're ready to talk.
Well, I accidentally hit it, and I don't have a voice. I'm going to turn my hand down. I'm sorry.
You're on the call.
Oh, that's too funny. I will say that Heather did comment earlier on the access to
Program access, and one of the things that she has her people do is carry a copy of the Older Americans Act and the rule where it talks about having access to come into a building. So sometimes just having, that wording in case somebody questions what right they have to be there. So I thought that was something I wanted to mention. Great.
So
I think there are lots of very practical ways that we can make improvements on any one of these items, and that sometimes it's just a matter of having some ideas about how to improve this or how to tackle it. Are there some areas that people want to talk about a little bit more where you weren't quite sure what the intent of this question was, or maybe you're stumped about how to improve yourself?
Yeah, raise your hand, type something into question or chat, and we'll look, if we see it, we'll unmute you. Oh, got a raised hand. Mary again, hang on. Mary,
okay, this is Mary again. I was kind of hoping someone else would respond, but I'm going to go back to the, and I don't know if I said we're Indiana, but so I think we talked about the kind of what's low, and for that was education, information, and assistance. Mm-hmm. We've been lacking in that. That's on page 2. So we've had a brochure that was very old and had a lot of misinformation on it. We don't have like individual publications for abuse, neglect, other advocacy topics, transfer, discharge, and the state ombudsman has not been able to be out due to staff shortages, has not been able to be out and educating. But the good thing is I know that next time I do this self-evaluation, that my score is going to be higher because we've already started improving our website. We have a new brochure with a new logo. It's a brochure that's easily updated because it's pretty general, and the phone number on there is the 800 number that we've had for years, and then the local ombudsman can put their own stamp or sticker on it so that their information is always current.
Great. And again, Mary, you've offered some very discrete, finite, specific things you could do and are doing to improve yourself in this area. And that's the first task, I think, is you see yourself maybe scoring lower than you want. Then you have to think about, how would I go about doing that? What's something I could accomplish in that category? And that's how you have to tackle these tasks. You got to create the tasks in your mind and be able to check the box off and do a good job with it. So I think it's awesome that you've identified those areas for improvement.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wonder about systems advocacy on that same page. This has often been a problem for many states. And one of the areas that I couldn't quite give myself a 5, and I sure wanted to, was under systems advocacy item 1. The program works together as a whole to address at least one systems advocacy goal that affects residents throughout the state. And I think I couldn't give myself a 5 because I wasn't feeling good that we do this as a whole. I still have some ombudsmen who are staff ombudsmen who really just aren't comfortable being part of what I consider our systems advocacy efforts. And so we're still working toward that goal. And I admit, as a state ombudsman, that finding the balance between being a decisive and strong leader and collecting input from your local staff and volunteers is hard. Sometimes to get the job done, I move forward with my state office staff and make decisions rather than taking the time to always collect information from the local perspective and help us drive that systems agenda. So I gave myself a 4 here, but I might have been generous in that department. This is an area for Texas, at least, that policies are important as well. When you look at systems advocacy item 2 and item 3, the program as a whole, not just me or my state office, but the local ombudsman being able to perform those functions when they want to, but being able to because of where they're housed. That's something we've really tackled and accomplished.
Patty, this is Carol. Have you had any of your state staff fill this out and then have a conversation?
No, I've always done this on my own, but that's a great idea. And so Carol's suggesting to us that we could have the whole, in my case, my whole state office team, and then kind of compare notes about how we scored our program. I think that's a great idea.
And then the next question is this is obviously the state mini tool. There is a local mini tool. Have you encouraged the locals to fill out their own local mini tool and have a conversation kind of like what you're having now?
Yes, we have this as part of our training to the leaders of each of our local programs. So when someone is brought on new to the program, they come here for an additional week of training that's kind of a management training. And this is part of that training so that they can take a look at what their local program is doing well on and needs to work on. And we have done this before as a training activity, like when we're all together as a state group. So the local programs have completed this self-evaluation. They are very shy about talking about it publicly. So we have to do a lot of the talking and acknowledge areas where we as a state see we need improvement. We don't have a lot of our local programs kind of admitting where their biggest areas of improvement are.
They must be related to the people on the phone here.
Would anybody like to speak up about another area, a question that you might have about any one of the tool or inquiries that were asked for? Well, Carol, I think I will pass it along to you, and thank you guys for taking the time to evaluate yourself, because it is important. And I hope you'll step away from this. Date this if you haven't already. Save it in a file so that when you do this again, when you're a mentor for someone, or if you do it again in a year, just to look back before you're a mentor, you can compare yourself to that previous year or years. Thanks, you guys. And thanks, Kathy. Great to hear your voice today.
Hang on here. Rosa has a question. Rosa, you are unmuted.
Hi, this is Rosa in Louisiana, and this could be for Carol or Patty, but sometimes I get a little confused on what truly systems advocacy is. Could y'all give some examples of what that is?
Rosa, it's Patty. Are you curious about the difference between something that's affecting, say, a facility versus something that could affect all the residents in nursing facilities in Louisiana?
I mean, not necessarily Louisiana, just overall, yeah.
Well, some examples that come to my mind are conducting an interview for a newspaper that's going to be distributed in some geographic area of your state, where you're talking about the needs of people in long-term care, and you're promoting an idea, an improvement for the system of care, for example. That could be an effort towards systems advocacy.
Okay.
Another example is certainly working with your state legislature, maybe a city council or other kind of smaller community where you're bringing forth an idea to improve care for assisted living residents or nursing facility residents, and educating that person. Maybe that means that a resolution or a bill is passed in your state. That's a big idea, and that's a big accomplishment. It may take many tries to get. Such a couple of things that come to my mind. What about for you, Carol?
I think we have a couple of webinars that we've done on this topic, and I will send the links out to those to everyone. But I think what Patty was mentioning, that whether it's the city council or the legislature, if you're trying to change something that's bigger than one resident, I mean, systems advocacy could be getting a hold of the corporate office and saying, we've been told that this particular, that your corporation no longer allows pets. And so you would be working on the issue across many buildings. Or if it's within a town, if they're changing the smoking rules and you wanted to weigh in on that on behalf of residents. Or whether it's the legislature and they're about ready to pass a bill to allow assisted living to take in any level of people, no matter what, you know. So well, or they may actually be doing something really good, and you want to be supportive of it. I shouldn't always be on the negative side, but you know, systems advocacy is going to be anything that's bigger than fixing it once. It's fixing it on a larger level so that more residents are affected, hopefully positively.
Gotcha. Thank y'all. That explains a little bit better for me.
Yeah, I understand that challenge, by the way, Rosa. I really struggled with this too, and for that reason, for our certification training in Texas, we created a chapter about systems advocacy, and we explained it, I hope, as well as Carol did, as describing the difference between what is an individual type of advocacy and what are examples of systems advocacy. And so I agree with her that sort of that casework level is typically going to be an individual example. Multiple cases about similar problems, like discharges and how they're handled in your state, might lead you to want to take an advocacy role with a systems advocacy approach to try and change how policies are affecting residents in a whole corporation or statewide. Glad you asked the question. Thank you.
And Patty, that, when you were talking about whether or not your systems advocacy was statewide or not, I mean, it's obviously easy for a local program to be doing some kind of systems work, but when you're talking across the whole state, then it's getting everyone to do the same thing. And I'm thinking of Melanie in Georgia a year or so ago when all her programs were focused on getting signatures to raise their personal needs allowance. And that was an example of the whole state program working on one issue. And those can be very time consuming if you're trying to get the whole program to work on it.
And I think it can be so varied what constitutes systems advocacy that it's kind of overwhelming to sometimes name what constitutes that. I think it's going to be interesting when we report for the first time in the new NORS system our examples a little differently about systems advocacy. I think it's going to be important for me to start making a list and keeping a record of things that I think will be good examples that I can report at the end of the year.
That's a good tip. Thank you. Okay, well, I don't see any other. Do you see that Mark Miller really wanted to be a part of this? He signed in 4 times. But but I don't see any other hand raised. So Patty, thank you. We're going to move on to. I'm hesitant to ask if there are any questions. If you have any questions, feel free to type them into your toolbox. And if you aren't seeing your toolbox, there's a little orange arrow on the right-hand side you can click on and open it up, and then you'll go, oh, that's how I get to how I raise my hand. But if you want to type something in, please feel free to do that. Some resources that the program that's on this PowerPoint presentation, the history and role for local programs. You can download that here off of our website. The history and role of the program, unique characteristics. This is just more of a training that you can use to make sure that people understand the nuances of being an advocate. And the Ombudsman program, continuous, the self-evaluation and continuous tool, which is what Patty was talking about for state, and then there's the one for the local. This PowerPoint is in your handouts in your toolbox. If you haven't found it there, it was also emailed out to you this morning. And when Katie puts this on the website, the handouts and the recording of this will all be there for you on the protected side of the website. And if we'll also say that the this is why when you try to multitask. Heather says, Patty and Kathy did a fabulous job, excellent advice and guidance. I'm always learning, so I appreciate their presentations today. Well, thank you, Heather, and I couldn't agree more that having the two of you give your insight to new folks is just perfect. And so I will ask at this point, Kathy or Patty, is there anything else that you would like to say to your fellow state ombudsmen that are really new? Patty?
I will say, be kind to yourself. If you scored yourself low and you're feeling a little down about some of the areas you need to work on and give yourself a break. To find a way to feel motivated by some of your scoring and choose one thing to work on this year.
Great advice. Thank you. Kathy, do you have anything, last words? Kathy's not around. Let's see. Okay. Well, I want to thank Kathy and Patty and all of those of you that spoke up, or those of you that were listening. We hope this information was helpful. As you know, always, Amity and Katie and I are here if you need to just call and just need to vent for a while. We can listen to you anytime, and if there's anything we can do to help you on your journey, we appreciate that. Look forward to seeing everyone in Orlando, and if you have not registered at the hotel, please do so. And if you've not registered online, please do so. And if you haven't filled out your what's happening or what's happened in 2018, please do so. All of that is on the protected side of the webinar. And somebody else has just typed in. Okay, we're getting more thank yous and thank yous. So everybody have a great afternoon, and we'll see you in a few months. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks to Nork. And next week you've got our next NORS training, right?
Yes, next Tuesday, I believe.
That sounds right. Looking forward to that. Thank you.
Hey, you're welcome. Bye.
Bye.